Welcome back to ABA Beyond the Data. I'm your host, Jay Burton, BCBA, and the dad of two awesome boys who just happen to be on the autism spectrum. This show is designed for behavior analysts who are looking to bridge the latest research to our professional practices, and it is dedicated to providing practical solutions to our practicing clinicians. And today's topic is one that is near and dear to my heart: parent training. BCBA space, I wear both hats. I'm the clinician, the BCBA, and I'm also the parent that's sitting across from another BCBA at our meeting. That means when I talk about parent training from the viewpoint of protocols and theories, when I'm in parent training, I'm thinking about the nights when I'm trying to get dinner on the table. I've got one kid in full meltdown tantrum and another who just spilled their juice all across the kitchen. And I'm thinking to my own programs and interventions and the recommendations that look beautiful on paper, but are completely impossible in my own actual life. So how can I recommend them to another parent? Today, the intersection between reality of the families that we work with and recommendations that we give, and the reality of this intersection. For the scene that I think almost every BCBA has lived through in some form. You walk into a parent meeting with a beautiful behavior plan. The graphs are clean, the functions are clear. You have a handout with steps and maybe even a homework sheet you rationally are proud of. You've carved out time in your schedule. You've done your prep and you're ready to go. They walk in 15 minutes late. They look exhausted. They apologize 3 times before they even sit down. You ask how the week went with the new strategies, and they say, honestly, we didn't really get to it. Maybe they tried once and it turned into a meltdown. Maybe they forgot what to do in the moment. Maybe they never even got to the page in the folder. And you feel that internal cocktail of frustration and guilt. Part of you is thinking, we need you to do this for the behavior plan to work. Another part is thinking, did I make this too hard? Am I failing them? Are they failing the plan? Ever stared at a parent handout that you spent hours working on for one single family that just doesn't even get looked at? And you're thinking to yourself, why do I even bother? This episode is for you. Flip that scene. Maybe you've also had parent training meetings where everything suddenly clicks. Same family, same child, same behaviors. This time, instead of plowing through 3 new procedures, you start by asking, how was your week? What felt hard? You find out mom's been sleeping 4 hours a night. Dad's working overtime. There's another kid who just had surgery, and the strategies you assigned would require them to be behavior analysts, full-time nurses, and night shift security guards all at once. So you throw out 80% of the plan. You pick one skill. You spend more time listening than you do talking. And suddenly, the next week, they show up on time and they actually did it. Same science, same toolbox, totally different outcomes because you dialed down the complexity and dialed up the listening and the compassion. So let's get into it, guys. My perspective on parent training, or parent guidance meetings as I prefer to call them, has changed dramatically since becoming a parent myself. Before having kids, I gave recommendations that now honestly make me laugh a little because I know there's no universe where I would follow them. If you're a parent, you know that our actual time with our kids is already packed. We are working, cooking, cleaning, dealing with school, driving to appointments, managing sibling fights, and maybe trying to, I don't know, get a single exercise in, a sip of water, trying to actually take care of ourselves and be adult humans. When you add in the extra layer that comes with autism, therapy schedules, meltdowns, communication breakdowns, sleep issues, that bandwidth shrinks even more. And the research backs this up. Reviews of caregiver mediated interventions repeatedly point out that while interventions can be effective, caregiver strain, stress, and mental health challenges remain major barriers to implementation. And research just shows over and over and over again how our programs are extremely effective, especially on paper in clinics and perfect little environments. But in the real world, when ran by parents, they're plagued by high attrition and parents not following strategies. Parents report they need supportive environments with professional feedback, training that is accessible but also flexible. They need emotional support and a community connection, not just a list of things to do, not just some easy to say but hard to do procedures. So, the main goal of this episode today is pretty simple. We're going to increase BCBA skills and parent training by doing less. I know, crazy. Less jargon, less overwhelm, less perfect protocols or nothing. And we're going to focus more on stress, barriers, and relationship. Because when you look at the literature, ABA based parent training and caregiver mediated interventions are powerful. They can improve social communication, they can reduce challenging behaviors, they can increase parent confidence, increase quality of life for not just the client, but the whole family. And they can reduce stress of the caregivers, of family members, and the strain of parenting. But the outcomes are mixed when we ignore the context that the parents actually live in. When we pretend that parent stress, treatment burden, and our own relationships don't matter, that shows up. All right, so to like ground us all in the research of where am I getting this other than just my personal opinions and experience, I'm going to be pulling from four main sources throughout the episode. First is the clinical review by Jessica Bradshaw and colleagues that lays out recent advances in caregiver mediated and caregiver trained interventions and highlights not just the effects on child outcomes, but also the barriers caregivers face and the strategies for supporting them. Then we'll be looking at a paper by Rothstein and colleagues in which they interviewed parents of autistic kids about what actually helps them engage and what actually gets in the way. Things like needing responsive professionals, flexible and affordable formats, and genuine social emotional support. Third, we'll look at the PSI tool or the Parent Stress Index. And finally, we'll lean heavily on the work by Taylor, LeBlanc, and Nozick on compassionate care and behavior analytic treatment. All right, before we go any further, let me do a quick CEU reminder. This show is ACE certified to provide CEUs to BCABAs, BCBAs, and to any of those BCBADs out there listening. And starting in 2026, it will also count for RBTs who are earning their professional development units. Here's how it works if you're new. At 3 different points in this episode, I'm going to drop a keyword. Jot those 3 words down, then head over to aba-ceus.com. After you listen, you'll find the episode under Get CEUs, and you'll enter those 3 keywords as you heard them. I check them manually, so don't worry if you get the spelling wrong. It's not that big of a deal as long as it's close enough, right? Then you'll just add episode 8 to your CU cart, check out, and you'll get your certificate in about 24 to 48 hours. And remember, if you're interested in any of the articles or in the research from this episode that I referenced, simply look at the description of the episode on the platform you're listening to, and you'll find all of the references there. All right, so let's take a step back real quick and ask a basic question. When I say parent training in ABA, what am I actually talking about? So we can really split parent training into two big buckets. The first bucket is caregiver mediated interventions. That's where we're teaching parents to implement core strategies directly with their child, often in natural routines. In the autism world, that tends to mean naturalistic, developmental, or behavioral approaches. So think NDBIs or ESDM style play routines or parent implemented social communication programs. The focus there is on parents learning to target the core features of autism, like social interaction and communication, inside everyday moments. The second bucket is caregiver training interventions. Those are much more common for most of us BCBAs. These are the parent meetings, the parent guidance meetings, whatever you want to call them, consult meetings that we're having on a regular basis and that are oftentimes mandated by insurance. Typically, we're coaching caregivers on behavioral techniques to decrease maladaptive behaviors or challenging behaviors, such as identifying functions, using reinforcement, teaching replacement skills, putting a consistent plan in place for severe tantrums, those sorts of things. So, in this episode, when I say parent training, I'm really talking about both of those, but with greater emphasis on the caregiver training interventions, the more classic model. And if you read through the research, the headline is actually pretty encouraging. Caregiver mediated interventions are generally effective at improving outcomes for young children, and same goes to the caregiver training interventions as well. They also have some nice side effects as well. Things like increased parenting confidence, better self efficacy, and reduced caregiver stress and strain when they're implemented well. So, if you've ever felt like, am I selling snake oil here? Does parent training even do anything? The answer from literature is yes. When parents are taught, supported, and actually able to implement these strategies, we see meaningful changes in child behavior and in family well being. But the story is not parent training is a magical wand. When you keep reading, a more complicated picture shows up. Systematic reviews of parent mediated interventions highlight that effect sizes are often small to moderate, and they vary a lot across studies and across families. Some randomized trials show nice gains in targeted skills, but not a ton of generalizations across settings or gains that are modest and take a long time to emerge. We also see that adherence and engagement are huge moderators. The exact same protocol can look very effective in one sample and pretty meh in another, largely depending on how much families were able to attend, practice, and stick with the strategies between sessions. And there are also some hard truths in literature. Parent mediated interventions can lead to adverse effects to the parents when parent stress, competing demands, and context aren't adequately addressed. Parents report feeling overwhelmed by training and guilty or blamed when they can't keep up. Some data report high dropouts or low engagement, particularly for families who are lower resourced, underrepresented, or facing multiple stressors. And when you look across services, parent engagement is actually lowest in behavior interventions compared to things like OT or speech therapy. That should give us a pause because when you think about parent adherence to the interventions that we're putting in front of them, a lot of it just comes down to how realistic our expectations are. And here's an example. You can probably picture this. You have a parent that reports that their son is refusing to get their shoes on before heading to school in the morning. You say he does great with it at the clinic and explain you simply wait him out to put them on and that they should do the same, completely ignoring the fact that sessions at 2 p.m. and you're asking the parent to do it at 7:30 a.m. with two other kids to drop off at school, one parent already gone to work, no coffee yet, and a bus that doesn't care about your extinction plan. Technically, the treatment is effective. Pragmatically, it is completely incompatible with the actual contingencies of that home. And FYI, I'm pulling that from my own experiences of families I've worked with. And the dumb thing that I responded to the parent with after I told them to wait it out and they said that didn't work because of all these different factors was I said, you should wake up earlier. Yeah, that parent was really gracious with me. 25-year-old me, first year BCBA. They were so gracious with me. I don't know how I made such a dumb recommendation, but here's the thing, right? It's all about learning and growing. For me, it took becoming a parent to fully understand everything parents go through. But for you, hopefully, it can just be this podcast. And research is behind this. As I've said, behavior interventions are impacted by the stressors of those implementing it. We have to understand the unique barriers each family has. And we have to be gracious enough with our parents to understand that this is a bidirectional effect. The higher the child's problem behaviors are, the higher the stress level of the parent. So the more gracious and more flexible our intervention should be with the parents. So when you put all of this together, the message is not parent training doesn't work. The message is parent training works when families can actually engage with it. Caregiver implemented interventions are generally effective for improving child skills. And caregiver well being and ABA based caregiver training models are effective for reducing challenging behaviors, but those effects are critically dependent on the family's ability to show up, to understand, and to implement the strategies in their real life. But failure to properly implement can also come from our failure to practice essential relationship building skills with the caregivers themselves. Things like listening, collaborating, acknowledging concerns, and the realities of their home can lead to families failing to support and implement programming correctly. And it can also lead to them asking for a new BCBA on the case or withdrawing from ABA altogether. If you look at other healthcare fields, empathy and compassion are linked with better patient adherence and better outcomes. And we should expect the same in our work with families. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, my parent training outcomes are all over the place. Some families do great, some drop off, some never quite get there. I want you to hear this clearly. You are not a bad BCBA. That inconsistency is exactly what literature shows. The problem isn't that you're failing to explain DRA well enough. The problem is that effective treatment procedures on paper are not sufficient when caregiver stress, context, and relationships and all the other things that are going on in the reality of parents' lives are just simply ignored. So our job then is a lot bigger than just explaining procedure. It's understanding what we're doing today with this exact family in this exact situation. It's understanding, am I going to break down the functions of behavior and explain exactly how to generally respond and use extinction procedures if that's what you're planning to use? Or am I going to need to sit down and listen to exactly what this family is going to for the next 30 or 40 minutes so that I can actually make programs and interventions that they can use and that will actually adapt to their environment? And it's being honest with ourselves that the science actually works. Yes, they work, but they don't always generalize well to the home environments. I mean, we have to accept that. And yes, we can do home interventions and move things over, but even then, is this routine going to work at 7:30 in the morning with three other kids and you're trying to get all of them into the car for a 30-minute commute? Does this protocol work in this exact situation? So, parent training works when families can actually engage with it. Now I want to zoom in on why that engagement falls apart so often. And spoiler alert, it's not because your parents are unmotivated or don't care. And I say this as a parent, we care a lot. But if you look at the behavioral parent training and parent mediated intervention literature out there, stress and life context are not side notes of those literature. They are front and center in explaining who benefits and who drops out. Ralston and colleagues point out that even though behavioral parent training is effective, about half of families drop out before they finish the program. Half. They highlight things like socioeconomic status, geography, lack of time, and competing life demands are reasons family can't fully participate, and they specifically note that a high level of parent stress can compromise both initial engagement and ongoing adherence. But that half number, that is not a small margin. And just think about how much we are asking parents to do. Oftentimes, it's like we are asking parents to be BCBAs in their own home. And research backs this up, especially in parent mediated intervention. In one systematic review of parent mediated interventions, it was expected of parents to spend roughly 48 hours of training over about a 5-week period, and then to actually implement the interventions required up to 20 hours a week of intervention. That's on top of the realities of life. That is just utter insanity. The authors of this systematic review of these parent mediated, and this is the key part, is that we are talking about parent mediated interventions, point out that this is simply unsustainable, especially for families that cannot put in the time, money, and energy. And if you're looking for the specific article, that's Bradshaw and colleagues. Again, you can always find all of the articles I reference in the description of the episode on the podcast platform that you're listening to. But it's not just with parent mediated interventions we're talking about here, guys. It is also with the classic behavioral intervention training that we're providing parents in classic ABA centers. In another article that I reviewed by Pasha and colleagues, a large body of research and meta analysis showed that parent engagement is lowest in behavioral interventions when compared to speech and OT. And you've probably felt this. You've probably had weeks where every other parent training was canceled or cut short. Parents telling you, we didn't quite get around to that protocol this week, or we tried it the first day and it was just too much. We couldn't handle the behavior. Or parents giving you that awkward grin when you ask about the protocol that you knew in the bottom of your heart they didn't want to do, and they're just straight up honest with you. Yeah, we didn't do that. And from our side of the table, it looks like resistance or lack of buy-in, but from their side, from us parents' side, it's the cost of implementation, the time, the emotional energy. sibling tantrums, sibling politics that you have to deal with, marital stress. It's just all too high of a cost for parents to actually give full buy-in. And a paper by Taylor LeBlanc and Nosek that I absolutely adore points out that parents of autistic children experience big, complicated emotions around the diagnosis and treatment. We feel anger, sadness, fear, so much guilt, anxiety, and just stress about the future. And those emotions that we parents have shape how we respond to the interventions that the BCBAs are proposing to us. And I can tell you from the bottom of my heart, this is a reality for parents. I cannot tell you how much emotional distress this diagnosis is on a family. If you haven't heard the passion in my voice in this episode, just let me make this very clear. Being on the other side of the table is not easy, and the baggage we are carrying should not just be ignored. I talk about my boys all the time, and I love them so much, but there is still so much more acceptance and emotional recognition that I still have to do. I mean, my youngest is 3 years old and he received his diagnosis only a year ago. We have no idea yet where developmentally he is going to go. He is still at that mystery stage where, he could thrive in ABA and maybe he can make huge milestones, or maybe he doesn't. And we still will love him so dearly, of course. But there remains the emotional baggage that is going to continue for a long time. I am just constantly cycling between heartbreak as I see him behind his peers and joy as I see progress at all. I mean, literally every time I run a VB map that is on a child that is near his age and the score is slightly higher or significantly higher than his, my heart literally just snaps because it is just a constant reminder. I cannot tell you the number of times that I have just teared up just thinking about his diagnosis on the car ride home. And if a parent's at that point where even thinking about their child's diagnosis is aversive, he might avoid anything that brings that discomfort into focus, including parent meetings, parent training with us BCBAs. That escape and avoidance can look like not returning calls, not implementing the procedures we train them on, or saying yes in the meetings and then never following through. If we're not attending to that emotional layer, we're at risk of responding unskillfully, blaming the parents when treatment integrity is low, or even ceasing certain treatment, rather than actively addressing those emotional responses and helping to reduce some of the fear and guilt driving them. But it's more than that. Poor relationship skills on our end, being rushed, not listening, coming off as authoritarian, or like we have our own agenda, can lead to failure to implement programs by the parents, requests to take us off the case, or withdraw from ABA altogether. And as a dad, I know exactly what it feels like to be handed one more thing. Track this data, run this 10-step bedtime routine, follow this script every time your kid melts down over a wrong bowl of cereal, all while you're trying to get kids fed, respond to emails, and maybe say 2 or 3 words to your partner and get everyone to bed at on the right time. Trust me when I say I know what the procedure is. I know what the protocols are. But do I, as a parent, have the energy to run that protocol correctly when it is 9 p.m.? The child will not go down to sleep, and I am exhausted from my own work as a BCBA. So now picture a parent who's trying to remember the protocol. It's 8:30, 9 p.m., and they're trying to just think of what the right answer is in this moment. How do you think they're going to perform? And if we were to run a little mini functional analysis of parents' non adherence, The same way we do with kids, what would we find? Let's say we got a mom here. She's arriving late to session after a night of broken sleep, an inbox full of emails from school about concerns about things that are going on in the classroom, maybe conflicting advice from the pediatrician and the BCBA, or the speech therapist and OT, and maybe cultural expectations about how the kid should behave, and a history of being judged by professionals. There may be underlying shame or fear that if I can't keep up with this plan that this BCBA is giving me, I'm failing my kid. Those are some powerful establishing operations. And the behavior we see might look like canceled or rescheduled sessions, forgetting, right? Forgetting, quote unquote, to take data, vague agreements in the room, but no behavior change at home. That's a short break from feeling the overwhelm that is existing in their life. And the consequences? In the short term, not implementing may be negatively reinforcing. They avoid a fight over a bedtime routine. They don't have to listen to their child cry. They've escaped the feeling of being evaluated or judged by a professional. In the long term, of course, progress stalls, goals are delayed, and everyone, child, parent, and provider, get more discouraged. That's the heartbreaking part. If we stop at the analysis of the parent didn't do the plan, we're missing the entire functional picture here. The research we've been talking about basically tells us that non-adherence is operant behavior sitting in a very specific set of conditions, not a personal flaw, not a parent that doesn't care. All right, we're going to pause here for just a second for our first keyword. The first keyword is barriers. 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 All right, so now at this point, we recognize and understand that parents have barriers, sure. But what do we do about that? Well, we're behavior analysts. We know to change a behavior, the first thing that we need to do is take data, collect baseline. We need to know whether or not the interventions that we're going to recommend and put in place are going to hinder the parent or if they're actually going to reduce the barriers and stress that they have. So, how do we actually measure stress and barriers other than saying, yeah, this family's going through a lot and we're hoping our support does something? Because if we aren't measuring it, how can we tell that anything's getting better? As we always say, data or it didn't happen. And just like our clients, we should be measuring parent stressors. And one tool that consistently pops up in the ABA world is the Parent Stress Index, currently on the fourth edition, or the PSI. Think of the PSI as a standardized way to quantify how much stress is sitting within the parent. It's been around in various forms for decades, and the fourth edition, along with its short form, has a solid psychometric backing as a way to screen and to monitor parent stress. There's a full version of 120 items, and then there's the PSI for short form with just about 36 items that gives you a total stress score and breaks it down into three domains: how stressed the parent feels in their role, how the parent experiences the parent child interactions, and how difficult they perceive the child's behavior to be. And for many of you out there already using the PSI 4, because it is becoming more and more a standard by insurance to be included at the initial authorization. And I completely understand why insurance is requiring this, because if the interventions that we're putting forth aren't actually helping the parents, then why is insurance paying? So, what does using the PSI 4 look like in practice? I want you to picture a parent who seems maxed out coming to your parent sessions. They're canceling sessions, they're not implementing consistently, and they seem shook up when you ask simply how things are going. Instead of just noting that it's a high stress environment, you give them the PSA 4. For ease of use, I would recommend the short form. It only has 36 items, takes about 10 minutes for parents to complete, and it gives you a total stress score and three subscales that you can refer to. Now you're not just saying they're stressed. You can see, oh, most of this is showing up as parental distress, or the biggest spike is in parent child dysfunctional interaction, or the difficult child scale is off the charts. That helps you tailor your parent training in a much more precise way. You can target exact areas. For example, if the parental distress score is high, that might cue you to spend more time doing what we talked about earlier: empathetic check ins, normalizing struggles, and building in very small, doable steps so they can contact success and feel less like they're failing. However, if the difficult child scale is high, that might nudge you towards more function based strategies or environmental modifications and supporting around interpreting behaviors as communication so the parent doesn't feel like their child is just being bad. And I recommend that you re-administer this anytime you're doing a treatment plan. So, every 3 to 6 months, probably 6 months is fine. And as the score dips down, or hopefully it's dipping down, it's going to give you actual data that says, yes, the interventions are working. What I am targeting is actually decreasing stress. Or if it's not, just like we are with our regular treatment plans with our kiddos, it gives us the idea that we might need to actually reassess and redesign our interventions with the parents. It's also a great indicator whether or not we should be getting additional support outside of ABA, like mental health care or even respite. All right, so we're starting to understand where the stress and barriers are coming from and how we can actually measure those stressors. But how do we actually show up when we have a stressed out parent right across from us at the table? Because it's one thing to understand that non adherence has a reason and a rhyme, and that stress is high and where specifically the stress areas are highest. It's another thing to sit across from a mom who is barely holding it together and figure out what to do differently in that moment. And the article by LeBlanc and colleagues gives us a really helpful language for this in their paper on compassionate care and behavior analytic treatment. They unpack a distinction that other health fields have been using for a while between sympathy, empathy, and compassion. They explain that sympathy is basically feeling sorry for someone, and in healthcare, it doesn't often land very well. It lands as pity and can actually feel pretty gross to the person on the receiving end. Empathy is different. Empathy is walking in another's shoes. It's perspective taking, accurately reading the parent's emotional experience, understanding it from their point of view, and then communicating that understanding back to them. And then compassion. Compassion takes empathy one step further. Compassion is when we act on that empathetic understanding to alleviate suffering. One definition they quote describes compassion as recognizing and emotionally resonating with parents' distress and then having the motivation and relational action to actually try to ease it. Maybe by helping reorienting goals, helping the parent be more compassionate with themselves, or helping them notice incremental gains instead of only seeing what's not changing. So, in ABA terms, compassionate care isn't a vibe, it's a repertoire. It's a set of observable behaviors such as listening, reflecting, validating, collaborating, and adapting. These skills that can be taught, can be prompted, reinforced, and shaped over time. They didn't just define these concepts, they actually asked parents what we're doing well and not so well. In their caregiver surveys, parents generally agreed with a lot of positive relationship items. Things like the behavior analyst caring about the child's progress and strengths. And the good news, when you look at the items tied to empathy, broader family impact, and patience, things like the analyst understands how this affects our whole family, or the analyst is patient when I'm upset, many of those means fell below 4 on a scale of 1 to 5, which kind of means that they're in the safe threshold, right? Not excellent, not terrible, just, getting by for sure. 4 out of 5, getting by. The negative behavior table is honestly a little painful to read, though, but it's important. Parents reported that behavior analysts sometimes seem to have their own agenda about the direction of the child's program, underestimate the child's ability, and focus too much on deficits and challenging behaviors. They also point out that we fail to communicate well and we can come across as authoritarian rather than collaborative. And the one that I think all of us can see is that we oftentimes seem busy and distracted. And finally, it points out that we too often use technical language that goes straight over their head. Again, this being on a scoring range of 1 to 5. For each of those categories I just listed, the worst scoring individuals, those with ones, made up around 15 to 20% of BCBAs that were being surveyed. That is a crazy high number for number of BCBAs scoring a 1 out of 5 on these areas. That means 1 out of 4 individuals on certain aspects of the survey got a 1. Now, the good thing is that the average score across all domains and the negative behaviors was 3.5, indicating not all that bad. And if you think about it, that means with really 1 out of 4 BCBA scoring at the very extreme low end, it really means that it's a select few that are scoring so terribly low. Well, I guess not a select few. It's 1 out of 4, so it can be pretty high for certain areas. But I think my point being here is that we do have a group that's dragging down our score, but the majority are really doing quite well. But we all know of the reputation of many BCBAs, or how many people feel about BCBAs, is that we have terrible bedside manners. And having 1 out of 4 BCBAs that represent us as a field, you can kind of understand why we get this reputation of having this terrible bedside manner. And I think we all know where this is coming from, right? I mean, there's this heavy emphasis on precision and jargon that shapes us through our graduate programs and through our practicum hours. And unfortunately, there's this like very toxic culture that we have as BCBAs in which we are constantly competing with each other. And because of that, it almost feels like we are trying to out jargon each other sometimes. And so if you are an outsider, an SLP, or an OT, or a parent looking in as multiple BCBAs are having a conversation about your child, all of it can go straight over your head and be very, very off putting. It can make us sound abrasive and authoritarian. Combine that with funding structures that limit time with families and heavy caseloads that make us rushed and distracted, and you've pretty much manufactured the exact relationship style that parents hate. So, what can we do instead? LeBlanc and colleagues lay out some really concrete curriculum components they've used to train their own teams. Core pieces include active listening, collaborating with caregivers, understanding family cultures, simply being kind, asking open-ended questions, avoiding technical jargon, of course, and caring for the entire family not just the data points that are tied to the individual client. And these are simple words, but in practice, they're very specific behaviors. For me, this ties back to the theme we've been circling this whole episode: simplicity and consistency. When I walk into a parent meeting, I try to keep a little mental checklist in my head. First, what is the main goal for today? Stated in plain language, not to increase compliance with demands, but let's see if we can make getting out the door in the morning a little easier. Second, what is one manageable strategy we can practice together today? Not five. Maybe it's a simple first then routine or one tiny piece of functional communication training. Third, what is one simple way parents can track success this week? That might be a tally mark. It might be just a check mark. It might be a yes, no. It might be a smiley face sticker. I don't really care, as long as it's something simple that they can actually do. And finally, what is one key message I'm going to repeat consistently instead of changing direction every week? Something like, we're looking for small wins and consistency, not perfection. Keeping the parents grounded to the realities of what behavior change actually looks like. And we can hear the difference when we apply that to our actual language. In our little BCBA brain, I might be thinking, we're going to implement a differential reinforcement of alternate behavior procedure with extinction of the target behavior. If I say that out loud, most parents will either tune out or feel completely intimidated. I felt intimidated just saying it. So instead, we really have to put things in easy to understand language. That same procedure, maybe it's around hitting, right? Maybe that's the target behavior. And if I said we're doing a DRA with an extinction procedure on aggression, you and I might understand how that is going to look. But to a parent, that means absolutely nothing. So I'm going to say something like, okay, when he hits, here's what we're going to do. We're going to stay calm. We're going to block it so he can't hurt anyone. And we're not going to have a big reaction to hitting. We're not going to say something like, no hitting or nice hands. But when he uses his words or even just points, we're going to pour on the attention. It's the same thing. That's the thing. It's the same thing. Just one actually sounds like a human phrase that somebody would actually say to another person and not like a robotic computer spitting out random jargon 101001 that might as well be what we're saying to the parents. And then we can dive into the compassionate care piece, which shows up when parents are opening up to us, especially about the stress in their environment. When parents are saying things like, this is a lot, or I'm tired, or I feel like I'm failing. The non compassionate move, and oftentimes too often of a BCBA move, is we rush in with fixes. Well, you really need to be consistent, or let's add another data sheet. The compassionate move is to slow down and say something like, yeah, this is a lot. It makes sense that you're tired and overwhelmed. You're carrying a lot right now. And then once that's landed, you narrow it to one tiny step for the week. Given all of that, all the things you're going through right now, let's work on this one small, doable step until next week. And let's see if that can help. I'm not asking you to be a counselor. I am not asking you to be a mental health therapist, guys. I am simply asking you to recognize with a half compassionate heart of what the parent is going through. And to understand that if you just pile on things to do and load it with nothing but jargon, you are doing nothing but tearing that parent even further down. And too often I see in this field that BCBAs just cop out. They say, well, I'm not a counselor, so it's not my job to care for this parent. You are a human being. You can listen. You can let them vent. And I think a lot of this comes from changing our internal mindset. Because here's the thing. If you go into a meeting thinking that this parent is just so dramatic or so stressed all the time, or that this parent is never satisfied, you are going to non-verbally show that in your meetings, and the parents are going to pick it up. They're not blind, guys. And so if you rephrase your mindset to yourself that instead of this parent's never satisfied, this parent is upset because they are trying to advocate and get the best services for their child. But it's also our internal dialogue of being compassionless towards ourselves. How many times a day as BCBAs do we just tell ourselves, oh my gosh, I totally messed that up? Or, oh my gosh, I'm a terrible BCBA. Or, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm telling this parent. I don't know if I'm actually helping. If you want to be successful with parents and you want to be more compassionate parent, the first step is to be more compassionate with yourself. Because the reality is, we parents don't have to show up. I know we say it's a requirement by insurance, but it's not really. And honestly, parents can easily just not show up or completely check out, but they are. And they're showing up because they respect you as a professional and they want to learn from you. And those little pieces of advice that you're giving to the parent can be life altering. I have this new family that I'm working with right now, and a lot of the maladaptive behaviors in which their child is going through is very attention maintained. And we hadn't yet been able to go through the functions of behavior and talk about how to respond to these things. And I gave the shortest, possibly the worst piece of advice ever because I was in a quick conversation with the parent and obviously being rushed from one supervision to the next. But I gave this piece of advice that when he is acting in this manner, I want you to go into a neutral tone. I want you to almost have a robotic voice with him because this child was getting highly reinforced by watching the parents escalate. And I had said this right before the family had went on vacation. And when the child came back, he was a totally different kid. I kid you not. And the parents came in glowing with joy and said, Jay, I tried doing that. I tried the robotic voice, like you said. And honest to God, I didn't even know what he was talking about. It went straight over my head. I had no idea. I do not remember telling him to have a robot voice. But this was life changing, and they quickly saw their son's behavior change. And they described how it got worse for a little bit, but that they trusted me and that they trusted that robot voice would work. And they just kept doing it, and it worked. This little piece of advice that I had just slipped in on a quick rundown of how session had gone, and that family saw immense improvement. That's blind trust. This is a family that I haven't even had formal parent intervention training yet because our schedules are not matching up yet. It is a new family, but we have not had that formal parent intervention training yet. I had just given an off cuff statement in a rushed moment, trying to explain a way to do attention extinction for this specific situation. And it worked like a charm. And so all of that to be said is that your little moments, your little statements, believe it or not, can be life changing for many of these parents. Okay, we're going to pause there for just a quick second. Your second key word is understanding. 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 All right, and the last thing I really want to cover with you guys is how we can frame our meetings to improve the quality of services that our parents are getting. And when we talk about framing, I think there is one step that we have to establish early on in the relationship with parents. And I've really seen this over the years of working with parents is this notion from the parents that we are expected to be the experts on absolutely everything related to their child and to autism. Parents come in with really understandable hopes and questions like, will ABA fix everything? Can you make him talk? Will she be able to live independently? And early in my career, I felt a lot of pressure to answer those questions in ways that kept hope alive, even when I really didn't know how realistic some of those outcomes were. So I want to start this framework by saying something to parents that can be extremely difficult, but that is also one of the most compassionate things that we can do. And that's to be honest about what ABA can and cannot do. When you look at the CASP, that is the Council of Autism Service Providers white paper that they release every few years, their most recent one showed that children that received early intensive behavioral intervention at 30 to 40 hours a week had an average drop of 11 points in the CARS score. Now, I don't expect all of my listeners to be experts of the CARS assessment, but that is a pretty significant drop. Um, a score of 30 indicates autism, level 1, mild autism. A score of about 40 indicates level 2 autism. So if you receive an 11-point drop, you're going from moderate autism to nearly no symptomology being shown, which is incredible if you think about it. But for individuals that have profound autism and are scoring, say, in the range of 50, that 11-point drop does not reduce their symptomology to outside the range of autism. ABA is absolutely an incredible thing, and an 11-point drop, no matter who the child is incredible. But we have to be honest with our parents that these were individuals that had this 11-point drop, were receiving early intensive behavior intervention. That's roughly between 12 and 36 months of age range when they started. These were individuals that were getting 30 to 40 hours per week. ABA is absolutely incredible. It truly is, but that does not mean that it is going to miraculously take away the symptomology of autism. So, when we're honest about this up front, it does two things. First, it takes some pressure off of us. We're not secretly promising ourselves that we're going to normalize, quote unquote, this child in a way that science doesn't actually support. Second, it can frame ABA for parent training as we are here to build skills and improve quality of life for this child and for your family, not to chase a cure that data doesn't back up. So when we start our parent training, I think this is a very critical thing for us to first establish. And once we get into our actual parent training, there is a 4-step simple cycle that you can run weekly or monthly or bi-weekly or whenever you have structured caregiver time. It's not fancy, it's not going to impress anyone on ABAI, but it's the kind of thing that actually fits into the lives of real families. Step 1 in this cycle is to do a emotional temperature check. For the first 5 to 10 minutes, your only job is to understand their week and their emotional state. This is where empathy and compassion really come alive. Practically, what does this sound like? It might be, hey, before we talk about any programs, can you just tell me how this week went for you guys? And then you can actually listen. You're tracking not just the content, but the emotion. You sound exhausted, or I'm hearing a lot of worry about his future right now, or it sounds like the mornings have just been brutal lately. You're reflecting back their feelings and checking that you got it right. That alone is a skill set we don't practice enough in supervision, and we definitely don't practice it enough in parent meetings. And let me put my parent hat on here. As a dad, when a professional skips this step and immediately launches into goals and data, it feels like I'm a set of tasks to complete, not a human being who's just trying to get through the day. When someone pauses and says, "Hey, how are things actually going?" and seems to really want to answer, I'm going to be way more likely to actually want to engage with what they're going to say. Step two in this simple cycle is to identify or review the top barriers and facilitators for this week. This means gauging the parent's stress level on a regular basis. Kind of think of it like your mini PSI style check in. You could ask things like, when you think about trying the strategy we talked about last week, what gets in the way? Then you follow up to hit a few domains. Logistics. Is there a time of day where this just doesn't fit your routine at all? Check in on emotional barriers. Does any part of this feel scary, embarrassing, or just like it's too much right now? And then you want to look in on intervention factors. Is there any part of the plan that feels too complicated or just not like your family's going to be able to run it or it fits into your family dynamic? From that conversation, your goal is to surface explicitly their top barriers and to identify what you can do to help. Step three is to teach or refine one strategy in simple language. This is where traditional ABA skills come in: behavioral skill training, modeling, role play, feedback, the stuff you all know. But here's the trick: I want you to play charade rules when it comes to describing things. You are not going to use the jargon of our field to actually describe it. I know when I first became a BCBA, this was the hardest thing for me to do. I was constantly just talking in jargon because I had just spent the last 2 years in grad school and had studied until my eyes were bloodshot for the exam. I was basically just a walking, talking Cooper book. So let's actually walk through those first three steps in an imagined scenario. Imagine a parent comes in overwhelmed by aggressive behaviors at home. You start with an emotional check in, and it becomes clear that evenings are the worst. The parent is juggling homework with an older sibling, cooking dinner, and your client is hitting any time a demand is placed. In step two, you identify the barrier. The parent is exhausted. Evenings are chaotic, and they are also really embarrassed because siblings have started copying some of the behaviors. A facilitator might be that grandma is often there during that window and wants to help. And then in step three, you resist the temptation to redesign the entire evening. That's the hardest part. You're going to focus on one context of that evening routine. Maybe it's the removal of the iPad, which is always a problem, but maybe it's the removal of the iPad that causes the most behaviors. You decide to teach a simple FCT routine where the child can hand over one more minute card or they can say a short phrase, and the parent honors that once, then follows through. You explain it simply, you physically model it if you can with the child, or you role play it if the child is not around. You have the parent practice with you and you give feedback, and that's it. The entire teaching portion of the meeting is over. And then the final step is step four, which is plan for follow through and self compassion. This is where we bake in the idea that imperfect adherence is expected and that problem solving beats self blaming every time. Here you zoom in on when, where, and how. Okay, so we're only going to use the FCT at tablet turnoff time before dinner. If 2 nights out of 7, it totally falls apart, that's not failure. That's just data. When that happens, just notice it and we'll talk about it next time so that we can work on it. In LeBlanc's and colleagues' article, they talk about how our own covert verbal behavior as clinicians can get pretty brutal. They point out that without self compassion, we get stuck in these non compassionate thought loops that actually make it harder to extend compassion to others. And parents do the same thing. I'm a terrible mom. I can't follow through. I can't follow this plan. We can interrupt that loop by explicitly normalizing the struggle. Of course, this is hard. You're trying to change a pattern that's been in place for years in the middle of a very busy evening. Let's expect some misses, and we can use those to tweak the plan. Ending on this reality check is that loop by explicitly normalizing the struggle. Of course, this is hard. You're trying to change a pattern that's been in place for years in the middle of a very busy evening. Let's expect some misses, and we can use those to tweak the plan. So if you want something you can hang on to as a mental screenshot, here it is. At the beginning of every parent session, check in on their emotional temperature. Then surface to the top by covering barriers and facilitators instead of guessing. Then teach or refine one simple strategy in plain language with a real practice. Then end by planning for follow through in a way that assumes imperfection and leans into self compassion and adjustment rather than blame. If we can be honest about what ABA can and can't do, if we can reduce stress by fitting our plans to real family life, and if we can show up with genuine compassion and simplicity, parent training stops feeling like a billing requirement or a box to be checked at the end of the month. It starts to feel like the core of good ABA practice, where we're not just changing child behavior in a clinic, we're supporting whole families in ways that actually work. Okay, we're going to pause there for our third and final CEU word. The word is simple. 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 All right, guys, let's wrap this up. If we zoom out over everything we've talked about today, there are a few big rocks I really want you to walk away with. The first is that parent training in ABA is effective when families can engage, when they're supported, and when strategies fit their lives. We see meaningful changes in kids' behaviors, in communication, and most importantly, at least for me as a parent, is parent confidence in implementing these procedures. We're not just ticking a requirement box, we are doing something that matters. But the second big rock is that parent stress and life context are not just side notes. They are not soft variables that sit on the edge of the graphs. They are directly impacting the adherence and, as a result, outcome. If a parent is exhausted, overwhelmed, juggling 3 jobs and 2 schools and a million appointments, that will show up in how much of your beautiful plan can actually happen and be properly implemented. And then finally, this core idea that compassionate care, simple intervention, and consistent parent training can drastically increase adherence and confidence by the parent. We listen, we take the parent perspective seriously, we act to ease suffering, and we trim the plan down to something a stressed human can actually do. So if you're feeling that tug of, am I doing enough in parent training? I'd invite you to start by making your approach more human, not more complicated. All right, guys, and ending on a reminder, I want to go over how you get your CEUs for this episode before we close. If you want your CEU credit for listening today, you're going to head over to aba-ceus.com. Once you're there, you'll click on the Get CEUs tab and find the CEU episode for episode 8. Add that episode 8 CEU to your cart. When you go through the checkout process, it's going to prompt you to enter the 3 keywords we mentioned throughout the episode. Just type those in. If you misspell it, don't worry. I actually checked these myself. Don't stress too much. If you misspell simple, not a big deal. I'll see it. After you submit those, it takes about 24 to 48 hours for me to review them, and they will be sent over to the email that you have provided. And if you like today's episode, be sure to leave us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. And be sure to share it with your teammates or that BCBA or grad student that absolutely dreads parent training meetings. Thanks for spending this hour with me and for the work you're doing for the kids and families we serve. I'm Jay Burton, and as always, thanks for going beyond the data.
Bye. See you next time.